We have been spotlighting books with a lot of local authors. And today I'm excited to be joined by Aaron Sharkey, who is the editor of A Darker Wilderness, Black Nature Writing from Soil to Stars, an incredible book that I'm excited to talk about. First and foremost, Aaron, thank you for joining us and taking time to talk about your book. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for asking me. It's great to be here.
What I appreciate about my favorite books is they alter my perspective. So I'm a nature lover. I've hiked in, I think, 30 states across this country.
Cool.
And I really value, sort of that outdoors element of my life. But in reading your book, it was fascinating to hear sort of the different ways that people view nature and the historic significance of that as well. For you, what inspired this book and the idea of telling the story of nature from a perspective that we usually don't hear from?
Sure. Well, I like nature very much, and I grew up spending a lot of time camping with my family and going to summer camps, exploring Minnesota and the rest of the country. I think we live in a really beautiful nation with lots of nature. But I think that the sort of intersection that inspired this collection came, I was at a point where I had a residency at the Anderson Library at the University of Minnesota through Coffee House Press in a program called Coffee House Press in the Stacks, which allowed me to just explore the collection, the Givens collection of African American literature. And in that collection, I was moved by how much nature persisted through all those works. And I particularly was inspired by a collection of unpublished ex-slave narratives that were taken during the Federal Works Commission and were interviews of folks who had survived enslavement in Mississippi, in an area near where my family's origins are. And I've just found in each of the narratives that the garden kept coming up. And I was looking for new ways to think about the 10 years that I lived on an urban farm in upstate New York, in Western New York. And I felt like this is maybe the way to get there, is to think about it through an archival lens and to think about what connections I could make to the archive. At the same time that I was in the residency, I was also teaching with Minnesota Prison Writing Workshop. And I was asked to teach a new class, a class on something that they hadn't offered before. And so I decided to teach a class on nature and environmental writing. And I wasn't sure how the guys were going to take it, but I really was inspired by all the ways that they were finding nature in their histories and in their own memories, and really important, crucial points that they're in their boyhoods, but also in the ways that they were able to make inroads and connections to nature, even in prison, which is a place that feels void of nature entirely. But if you remember that you're nature, and you remember that nature can persist and it exists in the air that we move through in the yard and the outside the windows and the ways the trees help us match and mark time as it moves. So it really was this moment, a kind of sort of perfect intersection of this time in the archive and the incredible things I was finding there, and this moment where I got to see nature in new ways.
I love the idea that we're nature because it makes it internal more than external, how I've always viewed it. Yep. I think what you take from this book is nature is not just necessarily tangible. It can be a photograph, a memory, an imagination. Yep. It can be so many different things. When people read this book, how do you hope they will then define nature, especially when it comes to the BIPOC experience and engagement with it?
Yeah, well, I think that it's by design that we tend to first think of nature as a place you go because of consumerism, because of sort of the American project around conquering, expansion, that sort of thing. So I challenge folks to try to notice nature in your living room. See if you can see it in your living room. If you can feel the way the sun moves across your space and you can mark the time, the way your animals try to seek it, the way your plants reach towards the windows, the way you get hungry and you respond to your hunger. I think that there are ways that we can get really in touch with it. It doesn't have to be a place we go to. We live in an incredible place where they have made a commitment to nature, to parks in our most people in the Twin Cities live pretty close to parks. And so I think there are opportunities to find connections close by. But I think that it's important to remember that nature isn't neutral. It's not solely a thing that we can take from. I think it's important to put a political lens on nature too. Who has access? What kind of access do they have? And how is that access tied to the legacies of racist policies in this nation, to be honest? So thinking about the ways that things like redlining, which were prevalent in the Twin Cities, are no longer an issue that we have to think of explicitly every day, but it is something that has remnants in the ways in which our neighborhoods are designed, the ways in which what things we have access to, where dirty uses for like chemicals and landfills or something, those things exist in proximity to folks who were redlined. So I think that it's valuable to think about that as people of color. I think that I want to insist on our access to those spaces, and to not think because your narrative hasn't been forwarded in a real public way doesn't mean that the way that your grandma taught you how to can, or the way you went fishing with your grandpa isn't nature. Like, and that is sacred and valuable, and we should lift those things up.
That's fascinating. I mean, like I said, I hike a lot, right? And a lot of times what you notice around here, usually, I mean, a lot of BIPOC folks I see on these hiking paths, and I always tell my daughters about this idea of access, and that, hey, this is yours too, right? There's an essay that really resonated about a soldier and a promise of land and just sort of the history of access. I took a trip to Mississippi to my dad's hometown this summer, and his father was a sharecropper, and the white family that owned the land still lives on that land. And then my dad showed us this little path where there was a shack where their family lived. And my dad to this day is a big gardener. Like, he's always outdoor with his plants. It made me think about how different the idea of nature and access to it was for him as a little boy, right, versus the children who grew up in that big house on the land, and just how that can just shape perspective. The idea of access and the political element of that. How has that impacted not only how we view nature, but also who controls the idea of what nature is?
Exactly. Yep. I think that really matters around our definitions, and I think we get to redefine it in our time. I think that essay is a great one to point to. I have lots of connections to your story. My dad brought me down to Mississippi to see our land too, and we went to visit our family cemetery plot, which is on a segregated cemetery that was instituted by the owner of that land that owned my family at one point. And their family is on one side of a fence and we're on the other side of the fence. I think that there are lots of narratives like that we all have, if we're able to find those connections with our stories. And I think that's one way that we can really run into these dead ends in terms of our research into our history, because of incomplete records, because of the ways in which the state hasn't included us into the important folks to remember. So I think when we find those little nuggets, we should lean into them and celebrate them and bring our imagination to them. So I think about the other essays in the collection. There's one where Ronald Greer remembers his grandfather's garden in Detroit and the ways in which it created sort of an intersection in a neighborhood that was really struggling, but the ways that it was sort of the home of his imagination as a young person. I think about Michael Cleaver Diggs's essay about his grandparents and the safe place that their house was after their father had passed away, and the way they learned the slow movements of a home. But I also think about Katie Robinson's essay. She's a local writer here, and the ways in which she really challenges my own definitions of nature. And I wanted hers to end the collection because I want to think about what is the supernatural? What does that have to do with the natural? What is the way that we interact with just the little things, like how we experience fear, and what does fear gift us? What does fear give us an opportunity to do? And so I wanted a whole range of experience in the collection to really highlight that it doesn't need to, you don't need to have even a positive relationship with nature. I was a chronically ill kid, and so there are some parts of me that, like, my asthma really made nature a touchy place for me. But I have found ways to feel connected there, to feel like its significance, and to understand its political possibilities. So I hope that folks find lots of inroads into the collection.
I was an asthma kid as well. And it's interesting, right, how that can impact just how you view things like nature. I think the power of this collection of essays for me is I've always viewed nature as something I engage, something I experience, something I have to seek. And I think what you get from this collection of essays is the idea that nature is something that can be created in a way. And that to me felt really compelling. Cool. And there's just so many powerful things. I mean, Michael's essay where he says, I'm not necessarily a reliable narrator, right? And then he tells this incredible story, and the reporting process of one of your authors being incarcerated during COVID and the challenges attached to actually getting the essay into print. I mean, this is just a magnificent work, and I'm so glad you did it. Last question, everyone should go out and get the book, A Dark Wilderness, edited by Aaron Sharkey. There are so many incredible essays in this book. Why was this book important to you?
Well, I was really looking for a container to talk about the powerful 10 years I spent living on an urban farm in Buffalo, New York, which really taught me to be a grown-up, taught me to be a member of a community. It really taught me a lot about seeing possibilities in places that had been really abandoned of those possibilities. And so I'm really grateful that that essay gets to live amongst some really gorgeous essays. I selfishly wanted a vehicle where I can ask my favorite writers, my favorite poets, to write in long form. I've definitely fangirled through the process of getting to ask some of my favorite writers to be a part of it. I feel proud of it for sure, and excited for all the ways it has opened up brand new conversations for me. And I'm in this new space where I am a co-owner of a retreat center in Annandale, Minnesota, really trying to center people of color and LGBTQ folks in the retreating experience, to make sure that there is a safe place for folks to come and experience nature, to do healing work, to do connection work, to do planning and rest work, to not work, to be in nature. And so it feels like it's a reminder for me in my day-to-day as I'm a professor too, but on my off time when I'm also working at Root Springs, our retreat, about the value of that and as a gift to community. So
it is definitely a gift. It's a beautiful collection of essays. And again, as someone who loves hiking and nature, and it just really made me think about not only how I perceive nature, but why, and I think that's just a really compelling component of the essays in this book. Aaron Sharkey, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you all for tuning in.
Yes, thanks a lot.